ESPN Wisconsin College Game Day, the return. Everybody is back. Wisconsin football is sort of back. We'll get to that and more. A bowl game today on New Year's Day. Happy New Year's, everybody. Colin Russo here, joined by our friends, former Badgers, Chris Orr and Brad Nortman, Adam Mertz, and our producer, Hunter Vaughn, also helping us out today as we do a little bit of a Teams call, a remote show on what we saw today. The Badgers falling to Louisiana State, the Tigers, 35-31. But I think we're all on the same page in terms of, like, what did you see? I think we saw some things that something to be happy about. Like, Brad, I want to start with you. You saw the game today. What was your initial takeaway?
My initial takeaway was actually pretty promising. I wasn't sure how this game was going to go. You never know how these matchups are going to go, interconference and, guys sitting out. I do think if Jaden Daniels would have played and Malik Neighbors would have played the whole game, this would have looked a whole lot different. That's a high-octane elite offense. But the reality is LSU is still littered with dudes. They got guys all over the board. They're always top 10 in recruiting, and they reload. And there was quite a few guys some guys that were injured, some guys in the transfer portal, but they had quite a few of their starters. So with that being said, same game as Wisconsin with guys transferring out or injured or looking to the draft. So I felt like it was a pretty even matchup if you take away Jaden Daniels, the Heisman winner. And the most promising part to me was offense. I mean, this was what the air raid was supposed to be all year. Tanner Mordecai putting up numbers, moving the ball, receivers making plays. And there was even actually some pretty good holes for running lanes, even though you don't have what you would call a feature back playing today. So I thought it was really promising. It actually left me a little bit like, what could have been? Like, why did it take this long? But then I need to remind myself that this was a major change for this university, for this team, personnel, coaching, the whole thing. Looking back at this time last year, I admit I thought it was gonna mesh sooner than what it did. I think we went through a lot of the growing pains this year. This was a first positive step to saying, okay, this is what it's supposed to look like that we're constructing. And it was the first time that I looked at the field and said, okay, I think I can see it. I think I can see what this team is building to be.
And we shift to our other former Badger on our program. Chris, I want to go to your takeaway. What did you see today, and how does this kind of like conclude the season for you?
Yeah, I'm in the same boat, man. I think we saw the air raid as advertised. I always look at bowl games as the season's done. The story of the season is already written. Now you're either going to put a period behind it or an exclamation point. Exclamation point. And I think we still put an exclamation point behind it. We advertised the air raid, dairy raid, what it's supposed to be. The frustrating part is the defense didn't play how they played all year. I think all year this defense played pretty well, at least keeping the games relatively close. That was disappointing, but outside of that, man, I'm happy. You can see what this team was supposed to be. I'm shocked that it took so long to gel as well, because it didn't look like we were doing anything schematically different today, offensively especially. Nothing was really different. I think that everybody just had the mindset of, I need to do my job and I need to do a little more. And we saw what that produced.
Mertzy, you agree with that? Is this sort of like you saw more of what we've been trying to do all year and it kind of just clicked today? Or was it situational? Was it matchup wise? What was your takeaway from today's game?
Yeah, a couple things that stood out. I'd echo a lot of what these guys said in terms of thinking that we were going to see more consistency earlier in the season about this. It's stunning to me when you step back and take away the fact that there was no Braylon and no Ches out there, the way that they were pretty effective. Like you guys said, running the ball, passing the ball. They looked just really comfortable in control. The thing that stood out to me was Tanner. He just looked more poised than he's looked early in the year. We saw some of the things that he could do, and I'm thinking like that Washington State game. We got some real glimpses there about his ability to keep a play alive, throw against his body, do a lot of things that we haven't seen from Badger quarterbacks in the past. But he came out there today like he was on a mission, and he was confident. He was throwing to guys with confidence. I will say also, I liked the collection of talent at receiver that was on the field today better than what I've seen during the season. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and pick apart individuals, but looking at what those guys did out there, putting Kekahuna out, that's a guy who made immediate contributions. A Burrows, obviously, but all these guys just seem to play a little bit better together. So I'm not going to discount that part of it either.
Yeah, it seems like offensively, just more was rolling that direction. Hunter Vaughn, the producer of this very program, you have an interesting perspective with this, a lifelong Graham Mertz defender. You saw Tanner Mordecai today, 27 of 40, 27 for 40 passing, 378 yards, and 3 touchdowns to 0 interceptions. Hunter, your takeaway from today's game?
I mean, that was what I was hoping we'd see from Graham Mertz all the time. And, we finally got that quarterback performance here in a bowl game that didn't really matter for Mordecai. So it was awesome to see. And I'm hoping that's a good sign of what this offense can do for a quarterback going forward, where it looks like probably Van Dyke, the transfer from Miami, will be the guy next year. I'm just still incredibly disappointed with the defense, though. The fact that they gave up an 8-play, 98-yard drive to end this game, really, and that's what lost them this game. Like, Wisconsin should never do that. Since Barry Alvarez has been the coach, a Wisconsin defense should not let a team go 98 yards on you to win a game. And it was just sad, and I'm really frustrated with Mike Tressel because I just don't see the vision right now for this defense.
It's interesting you said that because you mentioned them letting them get back into the game. 2 different times this game, the Badgers had 14-point leads, and with LSU was able to come back and tie it at certain points. 14-0 to open up the game. Badgers even left some points on the board, and all of a sudden LSU comes storming back pretty quickly. Then Badgers respond a little bit. You go into halftime up 28-14, and a little bit of back and forth. And then again, the aforementioned 98-yard drive in the fourth quarter by LSU, where essentially they were chucking it deep every single play, beating our corners. And, the way I look at it is I have a couple takeaways. My optimist point of view is that it was good to see Tanner Mordecai end his career relatively on a high note. A guy who probably doesn't have a lot of professional aspirations ahead of him. He played tough. He made some plays. The arm, I thought his arm looked as good as it has. It looked like his hand was fully healthy. And another thing, of course, the receivers, Bryson Green, Will Pauling also going over 100 yards. Those were the positives. Those are the optimistic perspective is that, okay, against man coverage, against the right matchups, we have guys that can expose certain defensive matchups and make something happen. Negative is I thought LSU, to what Brad said, didn't have Malik Neighbors they had for a bit. But that's 2 of the most prolific offensive players in college football that were not playing today. And LSU averaged 45 points per game, which is first in FBS. They gave up this is the 8th game they've given up 30-plus points on their schedule. This defense, the LSU defense, I should say, stinks. No 85 Bears. Forget about it. No 2014 Seahawks. Well, let's pause on the statue for Brian Kelly's defense, but like the Badgers, there wasn't a ton of challenge, and in terms of it from a defensive perspective, this is not a Big Ten defense. This is not an Iowa, getting in your grill and the front 7 all over you the entire game or playing good zone. This is a team that, all right, we're gonna play man the whole game, and we're gonna see what happens. And that's essentially was my takeaway. They put up some points at a defense that was poor, and they almost came away with it. They probably should have came away with it, but nonetheless, I have more optimistic perspective than I do pessimistic perspective. But there was a little bit of both ways that need to come into the bowl of what the hell this season was. And I think we could do it officially now. You got a good bowl game under your belt. I want to ask each and every one of you, what would be your grade for the season? Year 1 under Luke Fickell is official. We talked about it a lot during the year, but now you get a couple weeks to let it marinate a little bit. Less of the emotional side is into kind of the breakdown of what the year has been. Brad, I want to start with you. What would be your grade for what this season has been, included with the bowl game, included with a new transfer portal class? They got new guys coming in. What has Luke Fickell done? Year 1, everything involved. What would you grade it?
Well, I try to look at the benchmarks, which is your trophy games. You got Nebraska, Minnesota, and Iowa. How would you do against the Ohio States of the world? What's your overall record, bowl performance? I'm trying to take all of that, put it into one, looking at a 7-6 year. And yes, they won the Axe and the Freedom Trophy, but the Iowa game was ugly. Ohio State, they played okay. Terrible black eyes and blemishes against Northwestern and in Indiana. I'm going to go with a C minus, which is barely, C is like very average. And I wasn't tempted to go higher. I'm going to admit that. I wasn't tempted to go much higher. The only thing keeping it from being a D or lower is the fact that they won out and actually looked good in the bowl game and got those the trophies, particularly the Axe game. It's interesting. This team just never played a full game of football, it seems like, with the exception maybe Minnesota, where like you look at both offense, defense, and special teams, and you say, you know what? Everyone across the board played a full game of football, complemented one another. It just never happened. And this bowl game is another example of that. Offense did their job, put up numbers. Defense couldn't stop them, particularly when it mattered. So that type of, inability to work together, inconsistent on both sides of the ball. It was a C minus. I think a 7-6 year. That we've talked about this, and I'm very firm on it. This was my freshman year, 7-6, and man, it was tense in that building, and there was a lot of pain. This should be your floor. This should be your Wisconsin floor. I do believe this is the Wisconsin floor, so that's why it's a C minus to me. And I expect bigger things out of this team in the future. And I actually do think this ratchets it up a little bit for some kind of delivery next year. I'm still wrestling with what exactly I think that is, but I think that if you get another 7-6 year next year, that should be very cause for concern. So give me a C minus.
Okay. C minus for Brad. Chris, I want to shift to you. You're great for the season. Luke Fickell, year one, everything involved. What is it?
Yeah, Brad, I couldn't agree more. My grade was a C minus before the bowl game, and it's still the same now. The bowl game wasn't enough to wow me to say that, this is who we're going to be. This is the vision that we're building this program to be. I can't agree more. I think 7-6 is the worst that the Wisconsin football program will ever be, especially in the last few decades. Like that should be like your that's literally your bottom. That's literally your bottom floor. That's literally the worst class that you've had come through, worst team, whatever. That is your floor. So the inconsistency in the team and the fundamentals and the core of what makes up a good football team, that was lacking all year, which is what keeps the grade down for me. To me, to deliver, I just want to see the foundation, because I think that's what's important in the new age of college football, when you can get the glitz and the glams and this amazing hire or this amazing grab in the portal, and yeah, you're hot for a little while, but a strong foundation is what's going to keep you getting sustained success, and that's what I want to see us build. And that's just what I don't see yet. I don't see it yet. I thought we saw like pieces of it. I thought that the bowl game was a time. It usually is a time for like your young leaders to step up, and you kind of see the future of what next year will be, but still didn't see it because the defense didn't show up to play today like we had expected and come to expect them to do all year. They didn't do it, and the surprise of the day, the offense is what kept us entertained and what's giving us some motivation. But I can't help but to agree with what you said earlier, Colin, that this LSU defense was trash.
Terrible.
They were atrocious, bro. Like I vividly remember us picking games earlier in the season, and I'm like, LSU can't stop anybody. Yeah, they can score with everybody. Give me Missouri to win. I vividly remember picking Missouri to beat LSU for that particular reason. And yeah, so it's impressive, but you got to take it with a grain of salt. So still C minus for me.
Mertzy, we shift to you. What's your takeaway?
Yeah, I thought it was going to be the hard grader and go with the C minus, and we're just going to close it out with that, because I actually thought about the C even, and I feel like that's an important distinction, because I think we all want to put that minus on there. We all want to put this like that wasn't even good enough, especially when you step back and think about this historic opportunity of one of the weakest schedules that I've seen in a long time. Last chance to, waltz into the Big Ten championship game, get some exposure on a national stage, against a Michigan. Obviously, the way the team was playing, you wouldn't want that this year, but they should have been in a better position, should have been able to put a decent team on the field like they did today in terms of competing. So that's really frustrating to me. And I think you all have touched on it. The one thing on the offensive side of the ball today that was really, really frustrating to me was this, again, just a lack of coherence. And like when they should be aggressive, they're not. When you want them to be aggressive, they're passive. And I'm speaking specifically to decisions about down and distance. And that's what I think cost them momentum in this game. And maybe a chance to get a little bit further out. And I feel like that was just a recurring theme all year. And that's really like bothersome to me, as Chris was talking about fundamentals and foundation, and just sort of like you want to feel like a coaching staff that you bring in that's this high powered, that has this vision, that I think is doing some really nice things in recruiting. Like, dude, you got to do it on game day too. You got to be able to make adjustments. You got to be able to play with a passion and aggression to try to show that you're gonna come out on top in a game. And I felt like way too often, and again today, there's like timeout on that 4th down play, and then come out with that ridiculous play call, and they let 20 seconds burn off the clock. And I know I'm getting into like really granular stuff, but to me, it just summarizes there was something missing this whole year, and that's got to get cleaned up if they're going to go anywhere.
You're talking about like the feel of the game. You know, sometimes you didn't feel like coaches really had a grasp of where the team was at what point
Right.
and what they need to do. And that was a major problem for the team all year. I agree with that. Hunter, before we get to my thoughts, what about you? What's your takeaway? What's your grade on the year? I'm curious about this. I feel like you're going to be way more negative than the other three, despite the C- grade. I'd be surprised if you were anything above that. What's your takeaway?
So I'm actually going to surprise you, Colin. I'm giving this team a B. And it's because of the fact that, I think this is very similar to the way that we've been talking about the Green Bay Packers all year. Like, the bar can move on your expectations for a team when you're a fan of the team. Like, that's allowed to happen. I know Chris and Brad, when you guys are out on the field and you're playing with the team, your expectations stay up at the top. But like, you think about the Packers, and going into the season, we're like, oh, this is like a 6-win team, maybe 7 wins. Like, they're not going to be anything. And then they start to win some games. You're like, oh, okay. Then the bar goes down when they have a losing streak. Now it's moved back up. The bar hit rock bottom after the Indiana and Northwestern's losses for me. So the fact that they were able to bounce back, win a couple of games, and then finally start to look like the offense that we expected out of them, I'm leaving this bowl game. I'm like, okay, good. They're getting in the right direction. They're going forward. Things are looking better. I do still have a lot of issues with them. That's why it's not like a B+ or an A, but I'm still happy with the direction things are going in now. So I can't go and say, okay, you guys are maybe slightly below average right now. Like, I feel good. I'm happy with where things are going. So that's why, again, I got to go with a B on this team.
Really, and that's Luke Fickell year one. Just because the bar changes, you think just because of where you are today, January 1st, 2024, all things considered, you're at, this is okay. This is a B.
Yeah, because I adjusted my expectations. Like I said, after those those bad losses, like, I'm not going to diminish those losses. Those were inexcusable and really bad, but it moved what I thought of this team down far enough to where then they bounced back, and I'm like, okay, they're starting to get it. And with what they've done in recruiting and with the portal, like, I'm feeling good about this team. And yeah, I'm probably putting on my cardinal colored glasses and, as a fan, feeling really good about it. And I know, Chris, you're going to tell me I'm an idiot.
I'm blown away by that.
I don't. You're not an idiot. You're not an idiot. It's more so, I can't agree with the bar sliding. I can't agree with that. That's the only thing I can't. I understand the perspective. I do understand the perspective, being that you come into a season and like nobody was expecting us. I mean, granted, we had the schedule to do so, but nobody was expecting us to be like a playoff team or anything like that. I don't think you were expecting to be Big Ten champs, but I do think we were expecting to, especially seeing how the Big Ten West turned out to be. If you were to tell me that the West was going to be like this and that we weren't going to be in the Big Ten championship, I would have called you a liar, just based off of the talent we had coming back. Like, forget the schemes merging with the talent that we have on roster. Like, I would have just been like, man, we have the guys. We're going to get there. But like, I do still feel good. I do still feel good about the offense. It was, we did finally see it come alive. But at the same time, like, I can't I still can't overlook that this LSU defense was atrocious. Now, if we had this performance against not even somebody high power, but if we had this performance against Indiana or Northwestern, I think I'm feeling great. I probably agree with you. Like, no, this is a B, man. We just had a couple fluke games. Like, this is a B. But yeah, I'm sticking with the C-.
Yeah, I like the way Brad put it. The black eye blemishes of the Indiana and Northwestern games. That's the low point. Doesn't get worse than that if you're the Wisconsin Badgers. My takeaway is I'm first of all blown away that Hunter Vaughn took the optimist perspective when it came to this, especially after his opener about the defense. But nonetheless, I don't know if I'd go C-. I think I'm going to go C flat. And, the old saying, C's get degrees. I in a weird way, I have a feeling that Luke Fickell accomplished that and got a passing grade for year one. I think a C- is not necessarily reflective of that. I ultimately think you got the bare minimum, you got the C, you got out of the course, you got out of the year. And I say that because they played well in the bowl game. They had a good finish to the year. And sure, a lot of up and down, but it's still a C. And you get the C because, to Chris's point, you look at how the Big Ten West shook out. There's no reason that, based off the talent, that Wisconsin shouldn't have done what Iowa did. And by doing that, that means they beat the teams they have to beat, and they lose the games they're supposed to lose. And there's a level of that. Wisconsin got caught in a little bit of a purgatory in between. They're not nowhere near the top of the league, but they have more talent than the rest of the crew. So it's with Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State sitting at the top. You can't expect anything near that. But comparatively to Indiana, Northwestern, you from a winning coach's perspective, from Luke Fickell, who's had success elsewhere, from all the big names that have come in all over the place, you got to expect that Wisconsin would be better than that. That's not what we got this year. 7-6 is not good on the record. And, with the Big Ten just getting harder and harder, there's definitely a cause for worry. It's a sink or swim mentality that's going to have to set in pretty quick. And, for here, you could get away with a couple bad games, this and that. Next year, you're going to have dogfight after dogfight, every other week. So you're either going to sink fast or you're going to learn how to swim. So we'll see regarding what happens to that. But my takeaway would be a C. It sounds like Wisconsin Badger, like a C- is all across the board. Hunter, that lenient teacher who gives the B. Nonetheless, I think that's really the takeaway, that they're in the C range. Now, I want to bring up this question. This is something that Brad talked about pre-show a little bit. What will change in terms of, and I want to ask this from a coaching perspective. Hunter Vaughn brought up his issues with Mike Tressel, the defensive coordinator. Phil Longo, obviously, we've been very up and down on what's going on with Phil Longo and how he's been able to adapt to Big Ten defenses. And then you got Luke Fickell, you got other guys here and there. Are there going to be any changes in the coaching staff that will be of note this time when the season starts in August of 2024?
I don't think there will be. I think that we're going to have the O coordinator and D coordinator back. There might be some shifting in the ranks, of the position coaches, which is common. But I think it's going to be Longo, Tressel, and Fickell. And, I don't see them changing their approach either. I think that the only change that's going to be I think this year they stayed very firm on their philosophy. This is what we do. This is the new Wisconsin Badger football. And let's see what we can take to try to fit that mold. And it was an ugly fit. Like, there were times where that you can see it's just not clear. I think the only change will be the ingredients, being the players on the team, will be able to fit what they want to do more. You can see it a little bit more in the transfer portal. I feel like they got slightly faster. They have another round of transfers coming in, might have another one in spring. So I just think that they got the input, which is the players. I think that's just going to fit more of what they want to do. They tried to basically fit a round hole into a square peg, or whatever that phrase is. And it looked clunky. It looked clunky a lot of times. And I think they did it without remorse and without second guessing themselves, and just said, you know what, this is what we do, and you either fit our mold or you don't. And we can debate whether that is the right way to go about it or not, but that's just what I get out of this coaching staff. So that actually gives me a little bit of promise, though, going forward, to think that, okay, they're confident in it. And maybe that was the reason why this year was such a challenge, because there was clearly not a fit at several position groups. And that was one takeaway from the bowl game, particularly on offense, is look, I know that LSU defense wasn't very good, but maybe the offensive line is getting a little bit more comfortable. Maybe that, everybody is just settling into the offense. And I expect the offense and the defense to look a lot more fitting next year. But I don't think anything's changing from the offensive or from a coaching standpoint.
Yeah, I don't see any changes happening either. We're definitely going to have the same offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator for sure. If you have coaches leave, that just happens. Guys seeking better opportunities or whatever. They still trying to climb the ranks as well. But I agree. I agree with you. Brad. It was definitely trying to fit a square peg in a circle hole. Put some shoes on a snake. Whatever you want to say.
New one.
Sugar on fecal matter. But
oh wow.
But
well said.
Which is a little. I'm not gonna lie to you though. That's a little frustrating to me, at least. I wish that the coaches would take the approach of really doing some self scouting. Obviously you marry with the talent that you have coming in through the portal and the guys you're recruiting. You see if they can replace and fit the scheme exactly how you want. But if they can't, you have to make the adjustment to get some wins, which I think they'll eventually do. Hopefully we're not like in that position to have to do that. I do agree that I think they're very confident in their schemes, and I truly believe they feel like it's just we got to get the right guys in here. I think that's their approach. Nothing wrong with it. It's just different. It's just different from what you probably want, probably what's comforting, but it's the reality of football, the reality of the football world, and it's really coming to college football. This is what the NFL is, and it's coming to college football. That's just what it is. And you don't change your scheme for players in the NFL. You get players that can run your scheme. And that's the approach we have. Nothing wrong with it. I just hope that we can actually do it. I think it's harder to do that in college because it's hard to tell if a guy that's playing amazing in the Big 12 is going to come to the Big 10 and be that great, because I tell you that it truly is a different game. Going conference to conference is a different game. And people, even when people talk about the SEC and they talk about the physicality, I'll tell you this much from being in the box, the physicality, actual physicality, number one is the Big 10. I will say that. Sheer athletic freaks, number one is the SEC. You're going to have some guys that you're going to say, I cannot coach anything to stop this. I don't have any tools for you, bro, to help you. This guy. So it seems like those are the guys that we're trying to get in here. Hopefully we can, hopefully the chancellor help us out. Lower some of that stuff, man. Let's get whoever won in here. Be a football fan.
Lower some of this stuff.
I love the fact that we have that in a now, man. So I think we can get it done, but no changes will happen. I don't think any changes.
It seems like we're all on the same page in terms of Mertz. I assume you agree that the fact that we're not going to see any changes at the coaching staff.
Yeah, and I would even go as far as saying, I don't think you're going to see it in the first 3 years. Unless there's some opportunity for Tressel to move on. I don't think Longo's going anywhere. I think he wants to see this through. I think all those guys want to see this through. And I back what Brad said too, and what Chris is talking about. You saw that with the resolve that they had on sticking with what they got. And I'll tell you what, I was waiting to see how signing day would go, how the portal would go after a year like this, where it looks like, maybe there's some shakiness in what they're trying to get done. And the haul that they got tells me that, nope, they're confident that they're going to bring guys in, and they're talking guys into their vision for what they want this program to be. So, I mean, I think it's a 3-year plan, and then that's the time when, push comes to shove on whether this is going to work.
So let's just hypothetically say, just because I was looking at next year's schedule here, September 14th, home against Alabama.
Yeah.
September 28th at USC.
USC.
Hypothetically say both of those are 52-3 blowout losses. You don't think that they're moving on from Tressel at that point or anything like that?
I think it would depend on how those things happen. I think if it's like I just said, like you just have somebody, there's a Marvin Harrison Jr. out there somewhere that we don't know about, and they come alive that year, then it's different. That's a different conversation. But if it's just like man, they're doing whatever they want at will, we don't even have any point of friction at the point of attack, then in the world of football, like somebody's going to be a scapegoat, and you can't just cut guys in college. So somebody's going to take the fall at some point, whether it's the approach like Deion Sanders had at Colorado, where he stripped like play calling away, which kind of tells you what's coming, or straight up just fired. But yeah, I would think that some type of change happens at that point. I think the noise would be too loud to ignore.
Hunter brought up a decent point. That schedule next year, it's not easy. And, you got Penn State, Oregon, at USC, Alabama. Then, of course, you got the Iowa game. You got the Minnesota game. There's a lot of opportunities to slip up. And, in college football, where teams are really only asked, at least teams in the Big Ten, you're only asked for, like, your A effort and, like, your got to play the best game we can 2 or 3 times a year, where you're like, we can't slip up. Now, it's going to be a different type of year where it's like the NFL, where every week is like a Super Bowl, and every week is like, you're going to get somebody's best shot usually. Now, I want to ask you guys and leave it out to the floor. Mertz, we'll start with you. What would, based on that schedule, you got Alabama, you got Oregon, you got Penn State, you got, and then of course the normal games, you got Nebraska and Iowa, and what would a successful, way early in advance, we don't know what this team's going to look like. We don't know who even is going to be under center. Nonetheless, you got a lot of guys coming back. You got some pieces on the offensive line coming back. New quarterback in play. Some receivers are all back in the mix here. Some of the newer guys defensively shifting in and out. A lot of transfers at the linebacker position, Chris. Maybe we'll get into that in a minute. Nonetheless, what would a successful 2024 look like to you, Mr. Mertz? Go ahead.
So yeah, you look at the schedule, and you're not going to have a worse record than this year. You can't fall back on that line. Oh, we could have a worse record than this year and still be a success. Not even close, obviously. When I'm looking at it though, like 8-4 to me is the what I might expect out of that team. And I think to impress me, they'd have to go above that. 8-4 is what I would expect.
8-4 would be, you'd be happy with it.
I think that if a lot of the other intangibles about seeing where the program's developing, competing week to week, if you're out there and you're giving it a good run, you're feeling like this thing's in the right spot, 8-4, I think that's my bottom rung for saying like it's a success. But I think 9-3, I think there's a big gap because of how tough that schedule is. 9-3 is a big step up from 8-4 against that schedule, and 10-2 is ridiculous.
10-2 is actually a playoff conversation.
Yeah,
it's a ridiculous season if you're 10-2. Yeah.
Yeah. So, if 10-2, you're definitely in the top 12, without a doubt. Without a doubt. With that,
Chris, I guess we'll just roll right into you. What would a successful 2024 look like for the Wisconsin Badgers?
I agree with Mayor Mertz. I think I have like the asterisk by mine though. Is it depends on how those 4 look. Like to me, it depends on how those 4 look. And I'm not okay with exchanging like a win over Bama for a loss to like Purdue. I'm not okay with exchanging that without a doubt. I think if your wins are definitely for sure the teams you're supposed to beat, number 1. Number 2, you get some teams that maybe you're picked against or whatever. But I think if you have losses, it depends on how those look. I'm happy. I think it's a success if those are heartbreaking losses. I don't think it's a success if, we getting taken out to the woodshed or something like that. But if those are heartbreaking losses, I'm happy. I'm happy because those are a couple plays that don't go your way, and you're in your second year of building what you want to build, and that shows the foundation that you've laid and that you've set that, hey, we're here to compete with these guys where we're still a step or 2 away, but we've taken this leap from last year as far as consistent, good football play.
Brad, we'll go to you. What's your takeaway? What's a successful 2024 look like for the Wisconsin Badgers?
I need 9 wins. I think if this team is 8-4, I will agree with you. I'm not sitting here saying Luke Fickell's on the hot seat. I'm pacified. That's the best word I could use to be like, okay, I will wait longer then to like show me that you are who we think you are. Like I'm not gonna, it's 1 win better than this bottom floor level. But to be quite honest, okay, It's the normal cast of characters in the Big Ten West, plus Bama, Oregon, USC, Penn State. So 9 wins would be winning one of those. I want to see us win a big game, like win a big game, get a signature win. I totally agree. Like, I think the Badgers are going to be the underdog in all 4 of those games. So if they lose, it's like, okay, that's just chalk. And then you win out. And it's like a classic Wisconsin season, right? And there's no problem with that. It feels like that would be a step better than this year, which is why I'm pacified. But if I'm trying to say success, give me a big win the games you're supposed to win, end the season top 25. 9 regular season wins to me is like, okay, this team is making a statement. They're clearly not top 12 yet, but I can see where this is going. And, to be honest, I'd be pacified at 8-4. I'm concerned at 7-5. There's a phrase in the punting world in college where it's like, you can have a bad game, you just can't have multiple bad games. In the pros, you can have a bad punt, you just can't have multiple bad punts. So the theme is don't stack failures, right? If this team starts stacking failures, that's where it starts to be a concern. And actually that punting thing marks on like what your failure should be. Ohio State, like their failure is probably like being like a 10-2 team, right? And that's not the same for the Badgers. So it's a little bit different of a grading scale for everybody, but this is as close to the failures you can get without actually failing for the Wisconsin football team. So I'm really curious to make sure that they don't stack seasons like this, because I think that's what happened to Chris. I think that's what got him fired. Is like one bad year isn't horrible. You start stacking years that are stagnant. That's what'll get you fired, and that's what'll raise the hot seat for Fickell. So give me one big win in a 9-win season. That's a success.
It's interesting you brought up Ohio State. I don't think Ohio State fans are viewing this year. I mean, they lost 1 regular season game, then they lose a terrible bowl game. I don't think anybody's viewing that as any sort of success for the Ohio State football program. It's just a differing level of. We'd be throwing a parade. We'd be at the Capitol, like it's different. There's a level of, got to play to your standard, and it's just so different to think about it like that. Hunter, take us home. What's your takeaway on the 2024 season?
I mean, I think it all hinges on that turnover from October into November. I think they're going to be 5-2 going into the home game against Penn State on October 26th. And then the following week, they're going to be on the road at Iowa. If they can win, I mean, I think there's a real chance there where they can win both of those games, getting Penn State at home and then going on the road to beat Iowa. And then right there, you're a 2-loss team and you've got that Oregon game. I mean, with it being at home, like I'm trying not to be like this big homer on this because I know I can get very negative and I love to hate tweet about this team, but I'm sitting here looking at this schedule and I'm like, this could be a 2-loss season for this Badger team. And I don't know if they're gonna, I have a feeling they'll probably lose 2 of those 3 games there, but if they can figure out a way to rattle off those 3 wins, that's a huge success, and it's all going to be dependent on there, because I think those 2 games early on with Alabama and USC, because they're early in the year, I think they're going to be losses. So I'm almost just chalking it up and just moving past it. And I'm just like, okay, we've got to see what happens going from October into November. And that's what's going to determine this team and what sort of season they're going to have.
And my takeaway on that is it's kind of hard for me to chalk it up as just a win-loss record. The way I look at it is you got those big games that you have during the schedule that are not necessarily the trophy games. You got Penn State, you got Alabama, you got USC, you got Oregon. Those are your big games. And out of those games, you think about who's hypothesizing who's in position to have a big time year. Penn State's returning their quarterback. I think Penn State's going to have a pretty big year. Milroe's going to be back for Alabama. They're going to be really, really dangerous. USC, I think USC is due for a rude awakening. And I think that's because they lose Williams, and I think they're shifting to a new conference. And I think they're starting to get figured out a little bit. They gotta figure out a lot of stuff defensively before they can even come in and compete with the top of the top. I think there's a winnable game there. It's that. Then Oregon, new quarterback coming in. You don't really know what you're going to see. If you could go 1-3, you'll deal with it. Go 2-2, fantastic. Wow. In those big 4 games. Then you got your Iowa, Nebraska, and Minnesota. Nebraska, you got to assume, is going to be in a pretty damn good spot with Matt Rule year 2. I think he's sort of in the situation where, hey, there's a lot of positives to take away. I think Northwestern's in the similar boat. We have Northwestern next year as well. I think that they're two teams that are like, hey, they're going in the right direction. They are full steam ahead. We'll see what they can do next year. Out of those games, Iowa, Nebraska, and Minnesota, you got to go at least 2-1. And you do that, you go 2-1, 2-1 in those three games, and that 2-2 with the big games on the schedule with Alabama, USC, Penn State, and Oregon. I'll take that. That is a win. That is a win. But you got to assume if it happened this year, it could happen again next year. You're going to drop a game here. You're going to play terrible. You're going to get blown out by a team you shouldn't have. And that's just been Wisconsin football for about 4 or 5 years. You're going to lose a bad game. And you got to assume that the Badgers will lose another bad game, just a matter of which, whether it's bringing Purdue or whatever. And just because of that, I'm going to assume that winning 2 games in those big 4 non-trophy games, and then going 2-1 in those trophy games is important. And then, like Chris says, I know you got to beat the teams you're supposed to beat. You got to assume, take care of business with most of them. That at that point, you're looking at 3-4 losses, and I would take that and run. I would be surprised if this team was anywhere near playoff contention next year. Big Ten's a lot different too. You're not just going to get a throwaway bid to the Big Ten championship game with making way with the divisions. You're not going to just win the Big Ten West and then all of a sudden you make your way to Indianapolis. That is probably out of the consideration of what could happen next year with just so many players and so many teams. So you lose 3-4 games. You lose 2 you should lose. You lose 1 you shouldn't lose. And then you lose 1 that, okay, stuff happens. Out of that, if you have 4 of those, I think that makes sense. If you have 3 of those, I think you're stoked. So that's my takeaway. 3-4 losses is probably the baseline of what you're looking for. And I think that if the Badgers, this time next year, we're talking about that, how they went 3 and 4 regular season losses and then play well in a bowl game. I don't think that's the worst thing in the world. I think that's pretty standard with how growth usually happens in college football. I think that's probably a pretty safe estimate as to where this team will be after a year's time. Nonetheless, we will close today's program as we got the Rose Bowl coming up in a few short minutes. Gentlemen, terrific year as always. You know, we didn't have a full show format today. We're all in our own little spots, but nonetheless, Badgers finishing 7-6. I think all bad consideration, I think we had a pretty fun year having a good group doing a ESPN college game day. And I think we may have had a lot of fun with it. So for that, I thank you guys. You made it more bearable than it should have been. That's what I'll take. You know, you made it more doable to deal with it than what it should be. So nonetheless, I think we had a successful year together altogether. You guys are great.
Absolutely.
Facts,
Yeah.
man. Facts, man. Facts.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Good job,
Awesome.
man.
Good
No
crew
one left.
today.
No one left through the portal. No one
Yeah,
left through the portal. We're all here.
No, nobody's shifting over as we conclude today's post-game show. 35-31 final. LSU takes the bowl game in Tampa Bay at Raymond James Stadium over the Wisconsin Badgers. Some positives to take away offensively, a lot of negatives to take away defensively. The Badgers look to reload, reset, restart next year, hopefully on a high note. Big schedule coming up, Big Ten expanding. A lot of change coming to college football. The Badgers better be ready. Nonetheless, year 1 of Luke Fickell is officially completed. This year of ESPN college football and ESPN college game day is now concluded. Gentlemen, have a terrific new year, and let's take off 2024 running. How's that?